Black Hat. Heisenberg's Black Hat wasn't even in the original script for the series. It was a spontaneous choice by Bryan Cranston, who simply wanted to protect himself from the harsh New Mexico sun while filming in the desert. But the production team immediately realized they had pure gold on their hands. That simple accessory had an inexplicable transformative power. The hat worked as a perfect psychological switch. When Walter put it on, he literally ceased to exist as a person. Nothing remained of the shy and insecure chemistry teacher. Only Heisenberg remained cold, calculating, ruthless. It was as if the hat were a mask that revealed, rather than hid, Walter's true nature. For all the other characters in the series, seeing Walter wearing that hat meant one very clear thing: no more conversations, no more negotiations, no more emotional appeals. Now it was just business, pure power. Mike knew it, Gus knew it, even Jesse learned to recognize when the hat appeared. It was a sign that Walter White had left the scene and only the king of the meth empire remained on stage. Los Pollos Hermanos. The Los Pollos Hermanos chain logo, with its two chickens facing each other inside a triangle, was created by production designers to subtly suggest conflict and duality, a visual clue about Gus Fring's true nature hidden in plain sight. That seemingly innocent logo represented the most ingenious and terrifying facade ever created in television fiction. It symbolized Gus Fring's frightening discipline and obsessive meticulousness, his supernatural ability to build and maintain a billion-dollar drug empire behind the evil. The genius of Gus's operation lay not just in the logo's symbolism, but in how perfectly it reflected his methodology. Two worlds existing in perfect, calculated harmony. Every employee greeting, every health inspection, every corporate training video served as another layer of insulation between the legitimate business and the methamphetamine distribution network flowing beneath it. The restaurant chain wasn't merely a front, it was a masterclass in compartmentalization, where minimum wage workers unknowingly facilitated one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in television history. Gus understood that the best place to hide a secret isn't in darkness, but in the blinding light of corporate normalcy, where health department certificates and customer satisfaction surveys became the most effective camouflage imaginable. The Fly. The famous Fly episode was filmed almost entirely on a single set to save money from the tight budget of the third season. But what began as a financial necessity turned into one of the most profound and disturbing psychological analyses ever shown on television. The Fly wasn't really about an annoying insect flying around the underground lab. It was about Walter White's guilt flying incessantly through his head, buzzing in his ears, preventing him from finding peace. Every rotten secret he carried was embodied in that little insect. Jane killed by his omission, Gus Fring threatening his family, Jesse being manipulated, Skylar and the children being deceived every day. In the sterile, controlled environment of the lab, the Fly was the only dirty thing, just as Walter's conscience was the only impure thing in his meticulously constructed life of lies. Walter wasn't really hunting an insect during those endless hours. He was desperately trying to kill his own conscience, to silence the constant buzzing of guilt that was slowly driving him mad. Hector's Bell. Hector Salamanca's bell carries one of the most powerful stories in the entire series. For years, that simple object was the sound of the deepest humiliation, the soundtrack of a proud and violent man trapped in his own body, reduced to communicating through pathetic dings like a child. Each ring of the bell was simultaneously an expression of frustration and an act of silent planning. Hector may have lost the ability to speak, to walk, to act, but his mind remained razor sharp, plotting revenge against Gus Fring, the man who destroyed his family and his empire. In the final, glorious moment, that childish and seemingly harmless sound became the trigger for the most satisfying and cinematically perfect revenge in television history. Hector proved that the true will to power needs no voice, no movement, not even life to cause an explosion that would change everything. The bell was his last word, and what a powerful word it was. The pizza on the roof. The pizza on the roof scene became one of the most iconic and memeable moments of Breaking Bad, but it happened completely by accident. Bryan Cranston managed to hit the pizza on the roof of the house on the first take, something the production team tried to replicate dozens of times afterward and never succeeded. It was one of those magical moments in cinema where reality surpassed any planning. But that accidental scene became the perfect symbol of the comic tragedy that was Walter White's life. Here was a man who could take down entire criminal empires on the streets, who terrorized Mexican cartels, who built a million-dollar business, but at home, he couldn't even get through his own front door. The pizza on the roof isn't funny when you really think about it, it's deeply sad. It's the trophy of Walter's domestic impotence, the visual proof that all his power in the criminal world meant nothing when it came to winning back the love and respect of his own family. He may have been Heisenberg to the rest of the world, but to Skylar and the kids, he was just the man who threw pizza on the roof in a childish fit of rage. The sketch. The sketch of Heisenberg that appears on television is one of the most important pieces of the series' mythology, even though it bears little resemblance to Walter White. That crude drawing completely changed the game for Walter. Before the sketch, Heisenberg was just a rumor, a whisper in the underworld, an urban legend that may or may not have existed. After that face appeared on TV, Heisenberg became real to everyone, a legend with a face, a fear with a form. The sketch gave a visual identity to the terror that everyone felt, but no one could define. From that moment on, Walter was no longer just building an illegal business, he was competing with the fame and reputation of a ghost he himself had created. The police sketch was Heisenberg's official birth certificate in the criminal underworld, the moment he ceased to be a real person and became a living myth. The Pink Bear. The Pink Bear is so important in the mythology of Breaking Bad that the creators planted clues about it long before its appearance. The titles of 4 episodes in the second season, when read in sequence, form the phrase 737 down over ABQ. They were already warning the most attentive fans about the air tragedy that was to come. When the bear finally fell from the sky, charred and mutilated, it wasn't just wreckage from a plane crash. It was a ghost materialized to haunt Walter White for the rest of his journey. Floating in the pool at the White's house, it became the most disturbing visual proof that Walter's actions had consequences that spread far beyond his understanding or control. The bear's gouged out eye, which Walter kept as a morbid trophy in his drawer, represented the only judgment Heisenberg truly feared, not that of the law, not that of his family, but that of reality itself. That empty, accusing gaze was the embodiment of all the innocent lives that had been destroyed by one man's unbridled ambition. The bear did not speak, but its presence screamed the truth that Walter refused to accept. He was responsible for a tragedy that killed hundreds of innocent people. The Dish. The phrase, "this is not meth," has become one of the most iconic in the series, but it represents much more than just a clever lie. Those 5 words mark the exact moment when Walter White died and Heisenberg was born from the ashes. Heisenberg's first weapon was not a gun, a bomb, or a knife. It was a piece of broken dish and an industrial amount of bluffing and scientific knowledge. In that tense moment in Tuco Salamanca's lair, Walter turned his greatest weakness, being a scared teacher, into his greatest strength, being a scientific genius capable of turning anything into a deadly threat. That fragment of ceramic, presented as highly unstable fulminated mercury, was the first demonstration of the power that would define Heisenberg. The ability to use scientific knowledge not as a tool for creation and education, but as a weapon of pure psychological terror. It was the moment when science ceased to be his profession and became his weapon of war. The Silver Axe. The Salamanca cousins' silver axe was chosen specifically to contrast with the modern firearms that dominated the criminal world of the series. That ancient, brutal weapon showed that the cousins operated by an archaic, primitive, and utterly ruthless code of honor. The axe was never loud or flashy. It was the calm before the storm, the silent ritual before the slaughter. When that silver blade appeared, there was no room for negotiation, pleas, or changes of plan. It was the embodiment of the cartel's twisted justice, a force of nature that could not be stopped with words or money. The cousins didn't just use the axe to kill, they used it to send a message about what happens when someone disrespects the Salamanca family. It was an instrument of terror that spoke a language older and more visceral than any verbal threat could express. Blue Sky. The distinctive blue color of Walter's methamphetamine was a deliberate choice by the creators to give the product a unique visual identity in the drug market, as if it were a designer brand in the underworld. Blue Sky transcended its chemical nature to become a deadly work of art. Blue Sky wasn't just methamphetamine, it was Walter White's personal signature, the irrefutable proof of his intellectual and technical superiority. The legendary 99.1% purity was Walter's ultimate pride, the mathematical evidence that he was simply the best at something, finally. But like all great works of art, Blue Sky demanded terrible sacrifices from its creator. That beautiful blue drug wasn't just pure in chemical terms, it was the color of the destruction Walter spread wherever he went, the trademark of the plague that contaminated every life he touched. Blue Sky was simultaneously his greatest technical achievement and his most enduring curse. The Barrels of Money. The barrels of cash buried in the desert were inspired by real photographs of Mexican cartel fortunes found in exactly the same way by the police. For Walter, those barrels represented the ultimate goal of his entire journey, mathematical proof that he had won the game. But when Walter finally managed to amass that astronomical fortune, the barrels became his psychological prison. Buried in the vastness of the New Mexico desert, they were not a fortune, they were the golden coffin of his legacy, a completely useless treasure that cost him his family, his soul, and eventually his life. Those metal cylinders contained more than money they held, the most devastating visual proof that Walter's greatest victory was, in fact, his most tragic and complete defeat. He got more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, but he lost everything that really mattered in the process. The Book. Walt Whitman's book, Leaves of Grass, with Gail Boetticher's fateful dedication to my other favorite WW, was not just an innocent gift. It was a literary time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode and destroy everything Walter had built. Walter was so consumed by pride and vanity that he kept the most incriminating evidence of his crimes in his own bathroom, as if it were a trophy of his genius. He couldn't get rid of that book because it represented the recognition of his intellectual superiority, something Walter had always desperately wanted. When Hank finally found the book and read the dedication, he wasn't just discovering a family secret. He was discovering Heisenberg's soul printed on paper, proof that the brother-in-law he admired was actually the criminal he had been hunting for months. An entire empire, built on blood and chemistry, collapsed because of the vanity of a man who needed to be recognized for his genius, even if it cost him everything. The Pontiac Aztek. The production team deliberately chose the ugliest and most unsuccessful car in American automotive history. The Pontiac Aztek wasn't just a means of transportation, it was a living symbol of everything that was wrong with Walter White's life. Every scratch on that depressing beige bodywork screamed failure to anyone who looked at it. Every patched-up part was a scar of the mediocrity that defined his existence before Heisenberg. The Aztek was a silent witness to the most crucial moments of Walter's transformation. It saw the first cook in the desert with Jesse, witnessed the first death Walter caused, carried the first secrets and lies that began to corrode his soul. That pathetic car knew about all the crimes even before Walter's family suspected anything. When Walter finally sells the Aztek for a measly $50 to a stranger, we are not just watching a desperate commercial transaction. We are witnessing a ritual of symbolic death. Walter White was literally discarding his former identity, physically killing the last vestige of his mediocre life so that Heisenberg could emerge completely. The buyer didn't even know he was taking home the coffin on wheels of one of fiction's greatest criminals.